This Thursday, just gone, Games Workshop dropped the largest update to Legions Imperialis to date in the form of a brand new and comprehensive FAQ and Errata document. This document was intended to tighten up the rule set as well as address some of the many questions which have been slowly growing in the community since the game's original release. It's been a long time coming, but it certainly seems like it has been worth the wait so far. In this video, I'm going to take you through some of what I believe to be the most pertinent updates to the game, as well as some of the more significant rulings which have been made on some of the FAQs that the community has been submitting over the past year or so. If you want to find where this FAQ document is, you can go over to the Warhammer community pages, or I've stuck the link in the description below for your reference. So, without further ado, I think what we'll do is we will jump into the Errata to start with, and then slowly work our way through some of the FAQs. I'm not going to talk over everything which is in the FAQ document, because there is a lot. Go and find the document for yourself. You will see there's about 4 pages of the original Legions Imperialis rulebook, and then there is 2 additional pages for the Rise of the Dark Mechanicum and the Great Slaughter books. The most pertinent changes, though, are to the main rulebook, and there's a few in the Rise of the Dark Mechanicum book, so I'm going to largely be focusing on those 2 FAQ documents for this video. So, possibly the biggest change that the game is going to see, or will see now that this document is in play, is there has been an update to how march orders now work, where they are changing the order entirely to each model with a detachment issued with the march order may move up to a number of inches equal to twice its movement characteristic. Models in a detachment issued with a march order may not fire during the first fire or advancing fire stages of the combat phase. So this is a significant update to infantry. Previously, infantry marched triple their movement, and vehicles and walkers and everybody else moved double. Now this kind of resulted in some strange interactions where you had infantry bombing it across the field, moving or at least keeping up with a lot of vehicles, especially like on the Solar Auxilia side, where the vehicles are slightly slower than, say, Sicarans for the Legions Astartes. So this is going to significantly slow down your marching infantry, and I think the intention, as they did say in the Warhammer community post, is to put a bit more of an emphasis on transports, in particular dedicated transports. So now it's going to be an actual conscious decision to ensure that your list contains a balance between infantry stands and associated transports if you want to be pushing up the board quickly and securing objectives. Previously this wasn't a concern. You just marched and you were moving 15 inches with Space Marines walking it, or rather walking it on the trot. But now they'll only be moving 10, which kind of keeps them in line with things like dreadnoughts. One of my concerns when I've been playing the game, one of the reasons I very rarely use dreadnoughts in my Imperial Fists force, was that they just got left behind and they were so much slower than everything else. Now there's going to be more emphasis on transports. Your jet bikes and things like that are going to feel significantly quicker, as they should do, and I think we'll see a lot more people using dedicated transport formations and also using those transport slots. Next up, there is a change on page 49 to movement. This is just a change of the last paragraph to a movement characteristic of dash means models in the detachment cannot move, cannot embark or disembark from a transport, and the characteristic cannot be modified in any way. If such a model is required to withdraw from combat, it is destroyed. So I think what this has been brought in to address is there was certain thoughts on the community that you could have, like, for instance, you could embark and disembark tarantulas or automated sentries into rhinos, drive them up further up the field and drop them off. This basically means categorically you cannot do that if it's a fixed detachment with a movement of dash. You deploy them where you deploy them, and they ain't moving any further than that for the whole game. So I think not really much of a change, but definitely kind of like a sensible update, which I think means that those units and those detachments are going to be operating as they were intended to. The next one, page 55, advancing fire stage. There is a change to the second sentence of the third paragraph to state all detachments issued with an advance order must be activated in this stage, although they can be activated and do nothing. This, I think, is just to make it very clear that you can activate somebody with no target. You just activate them, burn that activation if they've got no target, or if they don't want to actually shoot, gives you the option of burning that activation. Page 55, resolve hits. Change the first sentence of the third paragraph to the following. A model can only be allocated a hit if it is an eligible target for a model in the firing detachment. In most instances, this means that the allocated model must be in range and line of sight of the firing model. Again, I think this is just a tightening up of the rules to stop those kind of speculative shots, I guess, which would otherwise have no real impact on the game, but again, wasting time possibly, or maybe trying to find some edge case advantage in that. But yeah, I feel like that's just a tightening up of that particular rule, and no real significant change to that one. Okay, next up, page 72, garrisoning structures. Add the following after the second sentence to the second paragraph. A detachment can garrison a structure if this would bring it within the engagement zone of an enemy model, but not if it would cause them to become engaged. So yeah, I think this just means that you can move within an inch if that would bring you in, but not into actual contact. So you would not initiate a fight by moving into a structure, but it would. You can still garrison a structure if, for instance, you're entering from the other side. Getting into a building just happens to be that there is a unit which is still hanging around within an inch of the building itself. Page 72, engaging garrison structures. Change the third sentence to the following. Infantry models in base-to-base contact with the structure count as engaged with all enemy detachments garrisoned within the structure. This is a change to the original ruling, which essentially said that all models in base-to-base contact with the structure count as engaged with detachments within. This led to questions about vehicles and walkers with the wrecker trait, which can be in contact with a building. Are they attacking the building? Can they attack the building, and are they engaged in the combat? Basically, what this means is now, if you want to fight infantry in combat in a structure, you have to do that with infantry. You can only engage in combat with infantry against infantry in a building. If you have walkers, or if you have vehicles or titans with a wrecker trait, they can only target the building and they do not count as being engaged with the unit inside. So this leaves infantry models with some options, really. The wrecker trait happens in the advancing fire stage, so the infantry inside the building would actually be able to shoot at whatever is in base-to-base contact with the building. If they're on a first fire, or if they got the drop on the activation in the advancing fire stage, they could shoot at the units which are attacking the building because they are not themselves engaged or engaged and pinned. Likewise, they could also, if they act early enough in the movement phase, they could actually leave the building and go somewhere else. Quite a substantial change, I think, but I think it does make a lot of sense. I think it gives Wrecker much more application, or rather it sort of confirms how Wrecker should be used on those close combat weapons, whereas before it was like, well, might as well just attack the unit inside because I'm pinning them down anyway. Makes sense, and yeah, I think that might change, I think, how people play the game a little bit, but it'd be interesting to see some of the kind of tactics which will arise because of that. And then on page 79, burrowing, add the following sentence to the end of this trait. Weapons with a burrowing trait cannot target flyers. Well, no shit, Sherlock. It was one of those kind of weird interactions where people with things like mole mortars were using mole mortars to attack planes. There was nothing in the rules which said you couldn't do that. Now it does. So there's no more mole mortars shooting flyers. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. It's a sensible change. Then we're on to some of the weapons. So page 83, Quake. So the Quake trait itself has been changed to, if one or more hits are scored against a detachment by the weapon with a Quake trait, the next time that detachment moves, halve the movement characteristics of all models within that detachment. The next time that detachment fires, subtract 1 from the result of any hit rolls the detachment makes. This trait is ignored if all hits scored by a weapon with this trait are allocated to a target's void shields. Quake previously was basically pointless and rubbish. You were only firing it in the first fire or the advancing fire stage, which meant that halving of the movement just never happened. Never happened at all. I think that this is what they meant to say, but obviously they didn't, so people read it as rules as written. And the firing, the subtract 1, you have to obviously hit the unit. You had to hit the unit before the unit itself fired. So again, you could end up firing your big Mori Quake cannon off the back of your Warbringer, and apart from just hurting a few stands, none of the special rules would actually take effect. Whereas now, this rolls on to the next time they would do something. So the following movement phase, they'll be on half movement. The following time they fire, they will be on a -1 to hit. Quite a big change to the Quake rule. Does what it should do. You're going to now need some tokens or something, I think, just to keep sort of track of which units have been quaked. This is how Quake should work, and I'm glad that change has been made. I think hopefully now we might actually see a few more Warbringers playing Legions Imperialis, whereas before just didn't happen. And the same with the Mori Quake on the Warlords. Then there's a change on page 84 to Shock Pulse. So change the first paragraph to, if one or more hits are scored against a vehicle, super heavy vehicle, knight or titan detachment by a weapon with a Shock Pulse trait, the next time that detachment moves, halve the movement characteristics of all models within that detachment, and the next time that detachment fires, it can only fire with a maximum of 1 weapon. So very similar to Quake, slightly different application. Again, you're going to need some way of tracking those Shock Pulse hits. I think that's going to make sabres quite nasty now, knowing that you can effectively half the movement of those big guys the next time they move. I think this is going to be especially spicy on the Iron Warriors formation of Legend, which gets rerolls to hit as well when targeting those super heavy plus detachments, and it can only fire with a maximum of 1 weapon again the next time. So previously you had to get in there first to stop that target from firing more than 1 weapon, whereas now it will roll over to the next time, so that trait is never lost. So again, quite nice. Be interesting to see if the Valdors and the sabres maybe move up a little bit in the meta. We shall have to see, I guess. Page 85, Skyfire. Change the last sentence of the second paragraph to, all Skyfire weapons in a detachment firing at a secondary target must target the same detachment unless another rule overrides this. I think this was something we were seeing in Derrideos, where they have their sky-firing rocket launchers on the back. I think people were choosing to allocate those hits to whoever they wanted to, and basically treating them as independent weapons. Whereas this is basically saying you have a primary target which your main guns are going to be shooting at, and you may allocate a secondary flyer target for your detachment to target with Skyfire weapons. So again, another sensible change in my opinion. I think this is much more what was intended rather than rules as written. Page 87, Automated Sentries. Add the following additional paragraph. Models in a detachment with this special rule have a tactical strength of 0, and this cannot be modified in any way. That's also a rule which has also been applied to drop pods on page 88, and I believe it's also been applied to Titans. I'll probably come across that later on when I get to that. But yeah, basically this means that they can't hold objectives. They can capture them if they're uncontested, but those drop pods, automated sentries, aren't going to do anything when it comes to holding those objectives the moment that you moves the moment your opponent moves one of their models into base-to-base contact with, or within 3 inches, I should say, of the objective. So yeah, makes sense. Automated sentries, they don't do anything, they just sit there and shoot stuff. Why would they hold an objective? Same with the drop pod. Makes sense. Page 88, Deep Strike. Change the 4th sentence of the 2nd paragraph. If the model scatters off the battlefield into an area of impassable terrain or onto a structure, then that model and the model's detachment are destroyed. Again, a clarification, I think, there, whereas I've seen some people stopping them at the board edge. If that should happen, that makes deep striking a little bit more riskier. I quite like that. They've also added the following additional paragraph. An overwatch caused against a detachment that has deep striked is resolved after all models have been set up and all other effects of the deep strike have been resolved, including disembarking from models with the Transport X special rule and the effects of the Orbital Assault special rule. So this, again, there was questions in the community as to whether you can target the drop pods on their way in and then effectively potentially also damage the units inside, like when a transport explodes. This categorically says that you would do that after all of that has happened, and you cannot interrupt that on the flight path down from space. So again, I think that this is a pretty sensible, straightforward update. I think that people who do deep strike and drop pod assault formations are going to be fans of that change, if that ever did come up in your meta. But yeah, I think also as well, it's just a way of kind of, there's so many times where you can, with Overwatch, you're interrupting. They've done a few tweaks which we'll come to later, which clarifies how that interruption works, which again is going to serve to probably speed the game up, all things told. Page 89, Flyer. Add the following sentence to the end of the 3rd paragraph. Models with the Flyer special rule cannot call Overwatch during the movement phase. Of course, if your Flyer has Intercept, it can still use that special Intercept attack during the movement phase, but yeah, you aren't able to forego your advance order on a Flyer to Overwatch. Forward deployment. So change the first sentence to after both players have deployed their armies, including infiltrating detachments, but before the first round of the battle. If all models in the detachment have the forward deploy special rule, the detachment may make a special move. The only change here really is including infiltrating detachments. I think there was arguments or confusion over where in the priority of things infiltrating detachments are put down. This obviously says that forward deployment is literally the last thing you do before you start the first turn of the game, including after infiltrated detachments have been deployed. And the change which I have been praying for, and I am glad to hear that my prayers have been answered, and I'm sure there is many people in the community who are very, very happy to see page 92, Infiltrate, changed. Add the following additional sentence. A detachment that is deployed in this way cannot be issued a charge order during the first round. Brilliant. That's exactly what we needed. The first turn charging infiltration meta was a bit toxic. It was frustrating to play against. Yeah, I never liked it myself. I've obviously used it because there was nothing in the rules to say that, but I always felt bad about using it when I did. I'm glad that that's changed. It will probably change things a little bit for whether Alpha Legion and a Raven Guard are quite as good as they used to be, but I think just the ability to deploy on objectives or halfway up the board is still significantly beneficial to both of those forces, so I still think that there is going to be a lot of use on infiltration. I do think it probably makes the Space Wolf special rule worse than it was before, because that was the main real counter to stopping those turn 1 charges, to forcing them back 14 inches. But at the end of the day, you're still giving yourself a 14-inch area where you can, not have bad guys. But it gives you a turn now to sort them out before you have to worry about those turn 1 charges. I like that single best change I think they've made in this FAQ and errata to the game. I think that's going to be really positive. Page 93, Master Tactician. So change the first and second sentence to: a detachment that contains one or more models with this special rule may be issued a command when it's activated. If the controlling player chooses to do so, they may select one other friendly detachment that has yet to be activated this round and is within 6 inches or one of 6 inches or more of one or more models with this special rule that are being activated. The selected detachment's order token is discarded and replaced with a different order they were eligible to be issued during the orders phase of this round. It's a long way of saying that you can't bend the orders that detachment would have by using Master Tactician. The way that this was used before many times was that you would put people in rhinos. Rhinos don't have the assault transport, for instance. You would put them on advance, and then you would use Master Tactician to change that advance to a charge after they've disembarked. This basically means you can't do that. They wouldn't have been eligible to have a charge order at the orders phase of this round, therefore they will not be able to be issued a charge order. Sensible, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure that there's some lists which are going to be hurt by that more than others, but I think, at the end of the day, the assault transports are there if you want to charge out of charge outs of vehicles. It's the whole reason assault transports exist. So bypassing that with Master Tactician never really felt right to me, and I am glad to see that has been clarified. Here we go, continuing, page 96, Transport. Add the following to the end of the first paragraph. Models can only embark onto transport models from the same army list. Okay, fine. I mean, I guess that stops allies. It just stops allies from using transports of the main army, or vice versa. I don't know how much that's going to affect the game. Maybe a little bit. I've never personally seen that come up, so it's interesting. We'll see. I don't really know how that's going to affect the game, but I guess we'll see. There's a few more going into things like Breakthrough, which is one of the missions. I'm not going to focus on that one today. But 164 onto some of the Legion Legion abilities and some of the changes there. Page 164, Ultramarines Interlocking Tactics. Change the first sentence to: an Ultramarines model may reroll any hit rolls of 1 when firing upon an enemy detachment that has already had 1 or more hits scored against it this round by an Ultramarines model from a different detachment in the same formation as the firing model. So this is interesting. This was we were obviously discussing this Legion rule in our latest podcast where we looked at the Loyalist Legions tier list. The key change here is that it stipulates from a different detachment. So there was suggestions that I'd heard from the community that you could trigger this ability by, say, attaching a unit or an upgrade of Terminators to a tactical squad, use the Terminators to fire first, and then that would allow the rerolls for the tactical Marines to then shoot the other ones, the other opponents, and benefit from that reroll of 1. This obviously stops that from happening. You have to have a completely separate detachment targeting before you will get that reroll of 1. Not a massive change, but again, a little bit of clarity. Page 168, Word Bearers, True Believers. Change the first sentence to: detachments with a Word Bearers formation never count as broken for the purposes of being issued an order, i.e. they can be issued any order they normally could instead of just the advance order or charge order. The change here is that or charge order. I believe in the rulebook it said march, but march isn't a rule which you can use when you are broken. So it's just referring you back to these are the 2 orders that you can take if you are broken. That is the clarification there, really. The march order was obviously just a typo when they published the book. And then page 171, Alpha Legion Mutable Tactics. Change the first sentence to: at the start of the battle, before any detachments are deployed, for each formation in an army made up entirely of Alpha Legion detachments, ignoring allied contingents, The controlling player may select up to 3 Alpha Legion detachments in the army to be affected by mutable tactics. Main change here is the at the start of the battle before any detachments are deployed. I think this just spells out exactly when you need to declare to your opponent what mutable tactics you're going to be using, and you don't do that as you're deploying or as you see the battlefields start to pan out in front of you. You have to be upfront with that. So those are all of the Errata changes to the main rulebook. Gone over very, very quickly. We will probably dive into these even more in future podcasts. Onto the FAQs. I'm not going to go through them all because there's loads. I think a lot of these are quite sensible and fairly self-explanatory, so I'll leave you to read most of them yourselves. However, there were a few which I wanted to call out because I thought that they were interesting or good clarifications to existing rules. So I'm going to start with, if an engaged and pinned detachment makes a pile-in move while issued a charge in order, do models that were not in base-to-base contact still gain the bonus to fight rolls if they move more than 1 inch? Yes, they do. So that's good to know. It was always a little bit of a do they, don't they? If they got a charge order, do they still benefit from it if they are the recipients of the charge, if they're doing a pile-in? Yes, they would gain the benefit if they've moved more than 1 inch. So that's a good one to know. On to the next one. This was an interesting clarification, I thought. Do detachments or models that do not count when calculating the break point of the formation, such as dedicated transports, or detachments with the automated sentries or drop pod special, will count towards reaching the break point of their formation when destroyed? And the answer is yes. The reason I think this is interesting is because dedicated transports in particular don't add to your breakpoint total, but they do count against you when you are calculating your breakpoints, which basically means that dedicated transports need to be probably treated with a little bit more respect than they used to be, because if you throw dedicated transports away, you are going to hit your break point quicker than you would do if they were regular transports. If they were regular transports, you would be adding their wounds to your breakpoints to give you a higher central breakpoint limit. Because you're not adding to the total, you are basically inflating, you're worsening your middle point break limit. So I guess I think that if you have access to transports within your formation and you don't need to use them for something funky, which you don't normally get within a say for instance like Spartans, and you don't normally get a Spartan as a dedicated transport, then put your rhinos into your transport slots as much as you can, rather than using them as dedicated transports and only using them as dedicated transports where you need to. Difference here will be, obviously, you have to so if you wanted to take 10 rhinos, for instance, which are going to be then assigned to 2 detachments of tactical marines, you'd have to use 2 slots of 5 to get that, whereas your detachments, you just add however many rhinos that you need. But if you add them into your transport slots, that's going to add you a point to your breakpoint limit, whereas if you don't and you use them as your dedicated transports, you won't be adding them to the breakpoint limit. I think this is going to be quite interesting when we're looking at some of those formations which you have to take dedicated transports, such as the drop pod assault. All of those drop pods are going to count against you when it comes to breaking your formation, but they're not going to add to your formation for the purposes of determining that number. And I think you probably want to think twice about your suicide rhino rushing. It was always like a bit of a tactic. Use your rhinos as a screen, use them as to charge into things to stop stuff from happening. It's going to be a risky strategy to do that, because if they die, which they probably will, then that's more points you're going to lose, and the closer you're going to get to your break points. So interesting change. I think they're obviously pushing transports now with the March rule change, so be careful, I guess, and think about how you use your transports, because you could very easily and very quickly find your formation broken. When a model with a variant of the Transport X special rule is destroyed during Overwatch, are transported detachments placed within 2 inches of the destroyed model at the point in its move where the opponent chooses to resolve that Overwatch attack? No. So this is similar, and I guess they've done this to make it the same ruling as the Drop Pod Assault. You resolve the move in its entirety first, and then you would get the people out if you wanted to, and then anybody who's destroyed would come out at the point where they would have got to. The designer's note here is, when moving a detachment, players should establish a start and end point of a move first, and then the line of movement of each model from start to end. So yeah, it stops you from ultimately calling an Overwatch halfway through a movement and basically popping out infantry out of cohesion with the rest of their infantry after they've completed their move. You just finish, you resolve your attacks at the time which is most opportune for you, but ultimately any infantry will pop out at the point when they have fully finished their move. So I think that is a sensible, consistent rule to what we've seen elsewhere, and it kind of removes all of that, but what should I do in this case or that case? It's like, no, it is just there, pop it out there, done. Next up, can special rules which require a detachment to be within a certain distance of another detachment, such as the Inspire X, take effect while the detachment or model with a special rule is embarked on a transport? And the answer there is no. However, the next one down says, can you do it when they're garrisoning a structure? And the answer is yes. Which does feel like a bit of an odd difference between the two. You would have thought that commanders would be in vehicles with probably better comms networks than buildings, so why couldn't they use that Inspire ability whilst in a transport compared to when they're in a building? Must be a balancing change or something. I'm not really sure why. Feels like you should have just gone yes or no to both and just left it at that. The next one, if a model that is equipped with 2 weapons with the Engine Killer and Rend traits wins in a fight, are the Engine Killer values cumulative when calculating how many wounds are suffered by the losing model affected by the Engine Killer trait? Yes. This is going to make for some spicy double chainsaw reavers, I think, as you're going to be kicking out quite a lot of wounds by the stacking. I think chainswords are Engine Killer 2, so become Engine Killer 4. Quite spicy, like that. Can an eligible detachment using the Infiltrate special rule to deploy outside of a player's deployment zone garrison a structure when it's deployed? Yes. It's always how we've played it. There's never been anything that said that you couldn't. I think the only discussion around garrisoning buildings otherwise just is specifically talking about garrisoning when it's in your deployment zone. I think it makes sense. I think especially sort of because they now can't charge, I think it makes sense that yes, they can still garrison a building. And if you think about like how the rule was probably intended, like the whole point in infiltrating is that you would set yourself up in some forward operating base, right? So yeah, you can garrison a structure. That's just confirmed now. That's good to see. If an Ultramarines detachment fires weapons with the light trait at a detachment that would cause hits to be discarded, do the hits still count as being scored for the purposes of Ultramarines Interlocking Tactics special rule? Yes. This is gratifying to see because we talked about this exact scenario on the Loyalist Legions tier list and how that could be a use for proccing the Interlocking Tactics special rule. So it's great to see it actually written down here as and confirmed as yes, you can use those light weapons to proc that. So again, rhinos, maybe shooting your rhinos as you're moving them up using your advancing using your point defense, and then something else getting the benefit of shooting them properly later on. Good, I like that. Good to see it confirmed. Are large movable elements such as the doors on drop pods considered to be insignificant elements for the purposes of measuring distance? No. The designer says when models such as drop pods are set up on the battlefield, they should be set up with the movable doors in the open position, which leads to the question, why would you ever paint the outside of your drop pods? I can only assume that they are trying to clarify and ascertain what the actual radius of the footprint of a drop pod actually is, to stop clustering of drop pods quite so much. When they've got their doors open, they're a much smaller footprint, you can get them much closer to each other. By having them down, they would now need to be further away from anybody, including other drop pods. So maybe just model them with the doors open and stick them on a base of the right size. Yeah, I think that this is going to mean that they're going to take up a lot more space on the board, so you might have to think a little bit more about how you move around them, how you deploy out of them, how you move through them, if you can move through them. But obviously it gives them a much bigger footprint as well for targeting, because you can target up to a door. But yeah, I think the main reason that they've put that one in there is to clarify the footprint that each drop pod should have. And then the last one from the main rulebook: if a transport is within 1 inch of a structure, can models disembark directly into that structure and garrisoning it? No. Yeah, fine, sensible change there, I think. They've got to get out first, and then they've got to get in as part of their movements and their movement activation. Just a couple then on the Legions Imperialis Rise of the Dark Mechanicum book. There is the clarification that Titans have a tactical strength of 0. They can take them, they just can't contest those objectives. Yeah, I think they've always kind of ruled that they suck at holding objectives, which I suppose makes sense. Always felt a little bit wrong, but I get why they would. Infantry king when it comes to that sort of stuff. There's been a few changes to weapons. I think the Thalax cohort had the plasma fusel before, which basically gave them 2 nearly identical weapons, whereas now they got the multi-melter in there as well. So they've got I think it's a light AT and a anti-tank weapon now for the Thalax cohort, which is quite good. And then the last real change is to the Triaros armoured conveyor, which replaces large Transport 4 with Transport 4. So that means that Triaros can now no longer transport bulky or walkers. So no more like Terminator size stuff, but most importantly, what I've seen people use Triaris for is transporting 2 Thanatars per Triaris, which always seemed a bit mental. Like, I wondered if they folded them up like the robots from Star Wars. It did always seem a bit strange that something so massive, never mind one of them, but 2 of them could fit inside the Triaris armoured conveyor. So that's the main change there. They are now just a regular transport vehicle for transporting normal infantry sized models, no longer any walkers or bulky units. So that's my initial kind of thoughts on what we're seeing in this particular FAQ in Errata. I think there's so much to digest here. It's going to take a few more days to kind of get my head around everything. I'm looking forward to playing the game now with some of those changes to things like march orders and infiltrate. We are going to be having our next narrative event on the 24th of May. All of these FAQs will be in effect for that event, and it will be really interesting to see how that changes the lists people are bringing and the tactics themselves on the day. Tickets for that are available now if you want to check it out. The details are in the comments. But please let me know what you thought about the FAQs. Are you happy? Are you sad about anything in particular? Do let us know. Drop us a note below. Overall, I think that this is a fantastic update and a real quality of life change for Legions Imperialis. I think some of the toxic rules and interactions and more janky interactions between rules have been cleared up by this FAQ. Not everything, obviously, 100%, but this has made a significant dent in some of the problems that we were seeing with this particular game, and I think that this will make the game a lot more fun And I think we're going to see a move away from infantry and more onto vehicles, especially transports, now that they probably are going to become a bit more of a must-have rather than a nice-to-have if you've got the points. Let us know what you think, and do remember to drop us a like and a subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and we'll see you again next time.